Okay, so today's video is all about 1996. I'll take you through some of the things that were happening in the world just to set the scene. Then I'll go through some of the movie releases, some of my own personal favourite movies, some of the metal album releases, and then I'll go on to describe the gigs that I went to. My name's Ricky and welcome to the channel Gig in 60 Seconds. In the US, Chicago Bulls won the NBA championship for the third year in a row, with Michael Jordan winning the MVP award in the finals. The Dallas Cowboys won the Super Bowl, beating the Pittsburgh Steelers. And in the world of boxing, Mike Tyson beat Frank Bruno in the third round by a technical knockout. This was their second match after firstly fighting in 1989. In the UK, there was also the announcement that the boy band Take That were splitting up. They've been successful for the last few years, and I remember this on the news headlines. There was crisis telephone numbers set up for anyone finding it difficult to cope with. In the movie world, top grossing film for the year was Independence Day, which starred Will Smith. Second was Twister, and third was Mission Impossible starring Tom Cruise. Some of my favourite film releases from that year though, which weren't the biggest grossing sales, were Trainspotting. That was released, a lot of you will remember that, very iconic. It was an adaptation of an Irvine Welsh novel directed by Danny Boyle, and it featured on a group of heroin addicts in the suburbs of Edinburgh. And it started the careers of Ewan McGregor, because in a few years later he went on to star in Star Wars. And also it was Kelly MacDonald's acting debut. It also had Robert Carlyle in it. A really good cast, really iconic scenes in it, lots of comedy moments in it, and it's revered as one of like Scotland's best films in surveys. Another notable film was Scream. This was a Wes Craven directed film, and it was very much a slasher film, a sort of nod back to the Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Halloween type films. It featured on like a group of friends at high school, and basically one of them gets killed, and then they all start getting picked off one by one by a killer known as Ghostface. You'll notice the memorable mask with the black sort of cape with the white ghost face on it. And this was a really good film, to be honest. It was a whodunit. You didn't actually know who the killer or killers were until the end of the film. It had a really strong cast as well in it. It had a young Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Neve Campbell and Drew Barrymore, among others. And yeah, it's spawned about 7 or 8 sequels since, and yeah, a really good film from that year. It did really well considering it wasn't released until like the 20th of December, and that's notably a time reserved for, well, not horror films that close to Christmas. So another film that I really liked was Jerry Maguire, and this starred Tom Cruise and Renée Zellweger, amongst others. And this featured on Tom Cruise, who was a sporting agent for NFL players, and his job was to get them signed to NFL teams or get them in big long contracts. And basically he lost all his clients and got booted out the firm that he was working for, and Renée Zellweger leaves her role and decides to go and work with him. And he only has one client, and he's relying on him to do well. There's a notable scene with the client speaking to Jerry Maguire, and he wants Jerry, Tom Cruise, to shout back to him on the phone, "Show me the money, show me the money." And it's really funny because he's shouting louder and louder in his office, "Show me the money." So yeah, it was a really good film. It was a rom-com, not my usual type of film, but one that I really like watching.
What you gonna do, Jerry? Show me the money! Congratulations, you're still my agent.
The last film I'm going to touch upon was Dusk Till Dawn, and this was a film that starred Quentin Tarantino and George Clooney, and also had Juliette Lewis in it. This was a bizarre film. Where the first time that I watched this, it was pre-internet, so I didn't know what it was about, and it starts off really dark. It features the two brothers, Tarantino and Clooney, and our bank robbers are going around America and holding up banks and shooting people, and there's a rape scene in it as well. and then they stumble across Juliet Lewis's family at one of these motels, and they decide to take them hostage to try and get across the borders to Mexico where they'll be safe. And it's some really dark themes throughout it. I mean, the first hour of the film is like that, and then they get to this pub in the desert called the Titty Twister. And they go inside there, and there's all this dancing going on. I think it was Salma Hayek, is that how you pronounce it? She was dancing for them, all sexy and stuff like this, and then you see her fixating on Tarantino's arm, who's covered in blood, and all of a sudden she just turns into this vampire, and then like the bartender and everyone else turns into vampires, and it just turns into this mad vampire flick for like the last 20-25 minutes of the film. Crazy goings on, just didn't see that coming, but a good film nonetheless. Okay, some notable album releases for me in the metal world. We had Metallica's follow-up to the Black Album with Load. Now, despite receiving really good sales, it actually wasn't received too well by the fans. This was a kind of move away from hard rock into some softer rock elements and indeed some blues elements, and I think it put a split in a lot of the fans. It clocked in at 79 minutes long. In fact, they had to take 3 minutes off of the song Outlaw Torn to get it onto the album, because I think the CD could only hold up to 80 minutes. You also had Rage Against the Machine with the album Evil Empire, which had some cracking songs in it. Most notably the first two, which were People of the Sun and Bulls on Parade, and they've featured heavily on their set list since then. They're two standout tracks, and I really love hearing those. Sepultura had the album Roots, which had 2 singles from it, and probably my favourite off the album, which was Roots Bloody Roots, which I've got a video of when they played in the Barrowlands recently. And also the last single taken from that album was Ratamahata, which featured the last single by frontman Max Cavalera. And the video was quite unique in it because it used that non-stop clay motion video technique throughout it. So that was around the time, I think, Celebrity Deathmatch had just been released on MTV at that time, if you remember that, about like the clay puppets that were fighting in the ring. That was quite funny. It used to be on for about 10 minutes on a Friday or Saturday night. One other metal release was we also had Pantera with The Great Southern Chainkill, which had a couple of good songs on it, Suicide Notes Parts 1 and 2, and also Floods. Okay, so now to the gigs that I went to in 1996, and what I've been trying to do is, obviously I don't have any footage, like filmed footage from back then, because I didn't have mobile phones and cameras you weren't allowed to take into the concerts, so I've been trying to see if I can find some footage from that time to show you. So I did manage to find some, obviously not from the gigs that I was at, but it gives you an idea of what the band looked like from that period. So the first gig that I went to in 1996 was our friends TerraVision, and I'd obviously seen them the year before. So when I was trying to research this, I could find that they were obviously quite mainstream. They'd had a bit of popularity, and they were actually featured on Top of the Pops quite a few times, 3 or 4 times I can find them performing several different songs. So I can't really remember too much from the Barras gig itself, but no doubt it was good, and I was probably right down the front jumping about as I did back then when I was only 20 years old. Okay, the second gig that I went to was The Almighty, back at the Barrowlands, and that was in the Just Add Live tour. So they had just released an album called Just Add Life. I remember it was this horrible green CD cover with like 9 squares on it with different pictures in between it. And to be honest, I wasn't really a fan of the actual album itself. I just remember it had a really good bonus, like second disc on it with a lot of live songs on it from the Crank album from the year previous, so that was the highlights for me. I mean, on this tour, they actually only played a few songs, I think, from the new album. There was a couple couple of them, Do You Understand and All Sussed Out, which feature like a trombone, which is a bit bizarre. So I managed to find some footage from the late show, which I'm playing in the background. But yeah, thankfully I didn't play too much from the new album from my memory, and played some of the older stuff because I'm not really a fan of this album, to be honest. Okay, next up was Dog Eat Dog, and that was at the garage. So in my previous year's video, I had thought I had seen Dog Eat Dog at the Barrowlands, and when I was researching this, I found out that I did actually see them. They'd supported Biohazard, who I saw in 1995, and that's obviously where I remember seeing them at the Barrowlands from. So they had received quite a lot of play. They were on like the Word programme in Channel 4, and they'd actually been in Top of the Pops as well. So when I was researching this, I found some footage from a festival called Dynamo in Holland, which I'm playing in the background, and you can just see like how mental, how much the crowd are into this band. So Dog Eat Dog were a kind of band that infused ska punk with hip hop, and they had some really good songs, most notably Who's the King, which is the one on this video, and the other one was the single No Fronts. And yeah, I do remember this from the Barrowlands, and I think that's what got me into this band. And then ultimately I went to the garage this year and saw them. So I plan on releasing like a short of this Who's the King single, and I'll link it to the video because I think it deserves to be heard because it's such a good song. So yeah, that was me seeing them. I don't think they played again in Glasgow until like 1999, and then that was them until like about 3 or 4 years ago. Okay, next up for me was the Prodigy at the Barrowlands, and I had to have some help in trying to remember this from two of my mates that were there, Sparky and Jason. So a couple of my mates that aren't really into rock music per se, and they were into their dance stuff, but obviously Prodigy is one of those rare bands that can kind of break the barrier between like metal and dance, because there's a lot of people in the metal scene that like the Prodigy and vice versa. So I'd met up with them beforehand, and we went to this gig at the Barras. I was reminded that we bought whistles outside from a guy, which we took inside the venue because it was just basically like a big massive rave. I remember that I crowd surfed. I was trying to show off to my pals. I remember I went over the top and crowd surfed a couple of times. I can't remember what songs they were, but I just remember, like, I'm going to go up, I'm going to go over the top, watch this, did you see me? And it was a good night. I looked back, I couldn't find... Okay, next up for me was Metallica at the Barrowlands, and that was only £15 to get in and see them. I went to this with my sister's boyfriend at the time. I don't know if you got the ticket, because I can't remember queuing up to get this ticket. I can't actually really remember queuing for any of these tickets throughout the years. So this was quite a surprise that this was at the Barrowlands and not at the SECC. But I think that just shows you that the popularity declined because of the release of this Load album. As I said earlier, it didn't go down too well with a lot of fans. So strangely, this actually had like a really strong set list on it. They actually only played 3 songs from the Load album, which I think maybe tells its own story, that they perhaps didn't feel that this album was their strongest. And if you look at the set list, it's got 4 songs, I think, from the Black album, and a few from Justice for All, and a few like cover tracks on it as well. So I don't really remember like too much from the gig, if I'm being brutally honest, and I couldn't find any footage from it, but I found some footage from the late show with Metallica playing on it, and it's got like the flames from the Load album, which was on the cover of the album at the time. So the last band that I saw this year was Skunk Anansie, and that was at the Barrowlands, which you'll see a theme emerging that a lot of my concerts are at the Barrowlands, especially in the early days, which is a good thing because it's my favourite venue. This was the second time seeing Skunk Anansie, having seen them almost a year before at King Tut's, which is quite a small venue in Glasgow, only holding maybe 200, 250 people, I would think, at a push. So I paid £5 for that ticket, and I paid £9 for this ticket. They just released like the album Stoosh, and they had a couple of really good singles from it called Twisted, Everyday Hurts, and Hedonism, Just Because You Feel. So I could find loads of footage on YouTube from them performing these songs on Top of the Pops. So it just shows you they're getting a real big push from the media at that time. This was their follow-up album to Paranoid and Sunburnt, and they're featured on Top of the Pops about four or five times throughout the year. So I don't know if it was just because they were a wee bit different. They weren't like totally heavy, and obviously they were featuring like a black lady on vocals, which was quite unique and quite, well, it wasn't the norm back then, you know. So yeah, I remember them playing those two songs from the gig because that's what I was looking forward to hearing, along with Little Baby Swastika and I Can Dream. So that was the second time that I'd seen them, and I'm looking forward to seeing them next month, because I won't have seen them for about 12 or 13 years. So that was my gigs. If you were at any of these concerts in particular, or if you maybe saw them on the UK or European tour, then let me know in the comments of what you thought about them. Until next time, have a good day, and thanks for watching.